First of all, I'd like to say welcome and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. Hopefully, you found your way to the Chick-fil-A table. So if there's any reconciliation for you spending your time here this evening, we hope that we provided you with a little bit of nourishment to get you through this next hour plus of discussion. I also want to say it's great to see some familiar faces. Some of you I've had the pleasure of working with, but most importantly, there are several of you in attendance tonight who were here for our session last week. So thank you for returning, and we think that we have a pretty good program outlined for you today. I want to take an opportunity to introduce the team, and we really didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about all of the valuable contributions that our team brings to share information with you this evening. So I just want to take a second or two and just recognize who they are and what agency they work with, and also introduce myself. And so my name is Alan Archer, and I'm one of two assistant city managers for the city of Newport News. I work closely with the police department as well as many of our human services departments, the Commonwealth Attorney, the Sheriff, the Community Services Board, the Health Department, and many others. It's truly been a pleasure to work for the City of Newport News. Joining me this evening, we have David Duck. Here is David. David is really, of all the people here, he's the most important person that you want to remember. Why is that? Because David is acting in a capacity beyond his everyday job, and he is serving as our project manager. So you will get emails from David. He's probably been in touch with many of you already. If you have day-to-day questions, anything that he can provide information or guidance to you about, David will be your day-to-day contact person. Joining David, and let me say a little bit about his background. He is a youth programs and outreach supervisor for the Department of Human Services. We're also joined by Sunithia Newby, and Dr. Sunithia Newby is a senior project manager in the city manager's office. We also have David Freeman, who's greeting individuals out front and directing them to the Chick-fil-A table, most importantly. David is an assistant to the city manager for the city manager's office. We also have Tracy Snell, and Tracy is a senior family services supervisor with the Department of Human Services. And we are also joined by Konstantinos Velisarios, and he is the senior budget analyst for the Department of Budget and Evaluation. And so this group is going to stay involved and engaged with you guys as we go through this process. There'll be others that will join us at various times, but this is sort of the core team working on this initiative. And so, you won't see us here tonight, and this will be the only time. We will continue to provide any guidance that we can to support those organizations that are interested in this grant initiative. I also want to just recognize and thank Dr. Sandra Cherry, our Vice Mayor. There she is, she's sitting down. She has been a very strong supporter for this work and the importance of it, and we've really appreciated her guidance and direction as we continue to try to grow efforts within the community to help with this very challenging and dynamic problem. And we're very convinced that many of you have the solutions right here in this room to this very vexing challenge in the community. So we're here to help you bring those solutions forward. And so our goal this evening is really very simple. We want to provide you with the education, the support, and the information necessary so that you can complete a thorough and competitive grant application. And we're going to work with you to ensure and do everything in our power that you are successful. So we have a program that we will run through this evening that we hope will be very informative, very straightforward and easy to follow. And then we're going to be here until we answer all of your questions before you go home this evening. So thanks again for your time and attention. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. And I'd like to introduce now David Duck. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Floor is a little slippery. Maybe it's my shoes. Test. Hello, hello. All right, can everybody hear me? Excellent. Thank you so much, Alan, for the introduction, and thank you for getting us started. I'm here to just talk to you a little bit about an overview of what we're going to be doing today and how this session is going to play out. Overall, first of all, let me do a couple little housekeeping rules here. You all are good with the food. If you need more, feel free to go back out there and revisit that table. There are exits right back here. And if you go out of the door, right back in where you came from, there is an exit out to the parking lot there. And restrooms are right out of this door. Make a left and a left at the desk, and you'll see a little hallway. And I think they're on the right-hand side, the ladies and the gentlemen restroom. So any questions about that before we get moving on? Any kind of logistics? All right, and everybody can hear me good. Excellent. So today, Alan kind of talked about it a bit, but the purpose of this training is ultimately for us to provide support. All right, so support to those of you who have limited or maybe no experience in responding to grant solicitations. We really want you to be successful in applying to these funds and any future funds that you may desire to apply for. So we're focusing on this grant, but we want to give you some basic tools and knowledge to be successful in and confident in applying to any grant that you may be interested in the future. We plan to offer that support today in a few different ways. So firstly, we want to increase skill set for responding to grant solicitations. So grant writing isn't really a luck of the draw kind of deal. It's a skill, and it's a skill that you can develop through applying and trying and taking classes and coming to sessions like this, where you can get some of that general knowledge about what to expect and what to do when you're taking that plunge to apply for some additional funding. And a lot of people have built their careers upon working in grant facilitation and grant writing and grant development. So today we hope to begin to start the foundation for you to kind of launch off of and be successful in grant writing. So the next thing we want to do is increase what we're going to call the 3 C's today. In my department, Human Services, as Alan mentioned, our 3 C's are caring, commitment, and collaboration. And those, I think, are really relevant to the work that we're doing, but we came up with 3 additional C's specifically for you. So we want to increase your comfort, competence, and confidence in responding to grant solicitations. And lastly, we really want to just generally increase your knowledge on organizing your business so that you're able to posture your business to become a successful grant securing machine. All right. So for today, what you can expect is 1, plenty of information sharing, and 2, which is going to be different from the last session, is more ongoing question and answer period. So after each section, each one of us speaks, we're going to give you an opportunity to ask questions about what we just discussed right then, and we'll join together to come up with the best answers that we can possibly come up with, and give you an opportunity to get clarity on specifically what it is that we talked about, rather than wait to the end for all of the questions today. And we have created a cheat sheet that you'll be able to take with you, that you have in front of you, that is full of definitions for some of those terms on the application, tips, things to avoid, as well as some amazing resources to support your grant writing journey. All right. So if there aren't any questions about any of that, do we have any questions about that? What you can expect in the agenda for today? I'm sorry? Would you say the 3 C's? Our 3 C's are comfort, competence, and confidence. We want to make sure you're comfortable in grant writing and you feel like you have the tools you need. You're competent and you understand what the grant is asking you to do, what you're expected to do, and what you need to get. And you're confident. You feel like you have the tools you need, and you can go forward saying that I submitted a proposal that I'm confident is at a level that can be funded. Any other questions? All right, everybody ready to go? Excellent. Without further ado, we'll move on to what to do before you say yes, and that will be facilitated by Ms. Tracy Snell.
Tracy, I have one quick announcement. Because as I'm sitting down, I realize that I failed to mention another valuable team member, and it's Miranda Eccles with the police department. She works with the Division of Youth and Community Outreach. Thank you, Miranda. Sorry. My fault.
Can't forget Miranda, she's one of the most important. So good evening, everybody. Again, I'm Tracy Snell with the Department of Human Services. One of my roles within the department is writing and managing grants. So hopefully I'll be able to share some good information with you about how to prepare to write your grant application. And so this section is called Before You Say Yes, as David said. And just wanted to give you a couple of things that maybe to think about or to look at before you actually make the decision to go forward and write the grant application. One of those things many of you have already done for this grant, which is go to any pre-application session. So if there's sessions or webinars that the grantor is offering to kind of help you understand the grant and what the funding priorities are, always a good idea to go to any of those pre-sessions. And so many of you came to that session we did last week that talked about this particular solicitation. So that's always a good idea. Another thing is being very careful to make sure you clearly read the entire grant announcement. And you're going to see those a lot of times called a NOFA or an RFA. That's a notice of funding availability or a request for applications. That's a lot of the jargon you'll hear sometimes in relation to grants. And you want to read that thing all the way through. Grantors, especially when you get to the point of applying for state and federal grants, they are very particular about how that grant is written, about just the font you use. It has to be double spaced. It has to be a certain number of characters. You can't go over this many pages. So there's a lot of detail that the grantor will put into that NOFA or that announcement. And many times, if you don't meet all of those requirements when they do the initial review, they will throw your application out and won't even look at it as part of that review process. So it's really, really important to read through that announcement and make sure that you understand what all the requirements are, what all the expectations are, what do you need to include attachment-wise, just all of those details. The timeline is important, making sure that you are clear to understand what the timeline of the grant is. How long do you have to write it? What is the due date? Definitely leave yourself enough time and make sure that you have enough time to respond to the solicitation. So if you find, you come across a grant solicitation and it's due in a week, that may not be the best one, to try to go after, because you're probably not going to have enough time to get it done successfully. So really understanding your timelines. And if there are different deadlines, so sometimes with the grant, they ask you to write a concept paper first, and there might be like 2 phases. And the first phase is write a concept paper, which is really just a smaller version of your application and giving them just kind of an idea of what it is that you're trying to do in your proposal. And then they'll review those concept papers and select organizations from those concept papers to go into the next phase, which is the actual full application. And so then you would actually go through the whole big detailed application that you would submit about your proposal. So really looking at all of that information, all of the deadlines that are in there. You really want to look at the capacity of your organization. So each grant solicitation is going to have very clear funding priorities, objectives, outcomes that you want to meet. And so when you're looking at the solicitation, you want to make sure that your organization could successfully meet those priorities and those outcomes. Some of the things to consider are your fiscal and human resources. So is the grant going to completely fund the project that you're proposing? Or do you have other funding availability within your organization to support the project? Sometimes grants, it may not be where the grant money is given to you up front, and it may be a reimbursement grant. And so that means you have to spend the money up front, and then the grantor will reimburse you for your actual expenses. And so if it's that type of grant, you want to make sure that you have the finances within your organization to be able to spend that money up front and then get reimbursed later. And make sure that you have the staff, enough people, to be able to successfully complete the project. When you're looking at the folks in your organization to actually implement the project, look at their experience. Now we have ease. Experience, expertise, endurance. Do they have the time to put in to get this grant successfully written? And you want to have, folks that have some experience, or whatever it is, whatever project it is you're designing, somebody that has the experience in implementation, because that's really going to speak to your capacity. The grantor is going to see that as your organization being able to effectively implement. You definitely want to be creative and innovative in the way that you design your project, but you also want to be reasonable as well, be realistic. So we all have a lot of creative and innovative ideas, but can we realistically implement within the organization that we're in? So you don't want to stifle your creativity, but you also want to keep it within the realm that you'll be able to implement. And this is really an opportunity when you're looking at the grant solicitation and you're trying to determine what kind of project you can do to propose under that grant. This is really an opportunity for you to look at that collaborative piece. And so if your organization maybe doesn't have the full capacity to implement on your own, what other partners could you bring into the table to collaborate with you to implement that project? So this is the time that you want to do that. And then, there are a wide range of grants. There are very small foundation grants. Walmart and Target have small grants for like $500 that you can apply for. I mean, they're just very small, and they go, all the way up to $1 million grants that the federal government offers. So, you want to look at all of those opportunities within that lens of what is realistic for your organization. Then as you're preparing to start the application, some of the things that you want to do as you're getting prepared, you want to make sure that you're organized. You've already looked at your timeline. You've already read the grant solicitation. So now you want to get everything organized. So you want to look at the data that you need to include. You're going to write a needs statement. So in that needs statement is going to be data. The grantor wants to see evidence base. So you're going to pull all that data that you need to include. That may be data from other places, or it may be data that's within your own organization. So if you are implementing a project and you're writing a grant to expand or enhance a project you're already implementing, you might pull your own data for outcomes. What have you already done through this project? What outcomes have the youth or families or communities already seen from the implementation of this project? So that might be, some of the data that you're pulling. All of your information about capacity, about sustainability, any piece that you might include in that grant application, you want to kind of gather all that information together. Strongly encourage you to read the grant announcement again and make sure that you understand all the details, the timelines, the instructions. Some of these grant solicitations are very, very specific. Like this grant that the city is doing, it's an electronic portal. So it's not quite as specific from a formatting perspective. But most of your state and federal grants specifically are very specific about formatting. So you want to make sure, they even tell you sometimes when you put a table or a chart within your narrative, what that should look like. So you really want to make sure that you read the announcement again and understand all of that. Make sure that you follow all of those instructions and those details, because like I said, depending on the grantor, sometimes they won't even consider your application if you didn't follow the formatting guidelines. And you definitely don't want your application to get dismissed because of something as simple as using the wrong font. And then make sure as you're writing your application, don't try to do it all by yourself. I've done that, and it's really hard. It's much, much simpler if you have a team of people to help you. So there's really three types of people, or three people that you really need to help you. And you may be one of those people, so maybe you just need 2 more. But the 3 types of people you really need on a team is somebody that really has the strong written communication skills. So somebody that can write the grant narrative in a way that the design that the grantor is looking for. So, very strong written communication skills, grammar, sentence structure, that kind of stuff. Somebody who is good with budgets, somebody who is good at helping you identify what are all of the things that you need that are going to have a cost within this project, and how do you identify that cost, and then putting that budget together. So somebody who is really good at that piece. And then last but not least, somebody who can proofread for you. Proofreading is really, really critical, because once you've been looking at this grant application for so long, it all runs together and you really can't see the forest for the trees anymore. So you really want to have somebody else kind of put fresh eyes on it, proofread it for you, and somebody who's not afraid to give you critical feedback. Because sometimes people will read through things and they'll be like, oh, it sounds great. And you're like, yeah, no, it doesn't. So you really need somebody who's not afraid to tell you, I think this may sound better if you do it this way, or this really, kind of needs some work. So make sure you have somebody who's willing to do that piece with you as well. So those are some of the tips around preparing to write your application. So are there questions or comments about the preparation phase? The 3 E's. Oh, now I gotta put my glasses back on. It was around organizational capacity, and there was experience, expertise, and endurance. All right, so if there's no more questions, I'm going to pass it on to Miranda.
I have a question for you.
Oh, yes, Alan.
Very quick one. You might share with the group this evening why sustainability is such an important feature
Sure.
for organizations to consider.
Sure. So the grantor is going to be looking at your ability to maintain this project after the grant money is gone. So, grant funds are, time limited. It's not an infinite pot of money. So the grantor, before they're going to give you, particularly large sums of money, they want to make sure that if this project is something that's going to continue, that your organization has the ability to maintain it. So, what are your ideas on, once the grant funding has been expended, how are you going to continue? That may be where some of that collaboration comes in. So it may be that your organization doesn't have the large dollars, but maybe you can partner with another organization that does to continue this project. So you really want to be able to show the grantor that you can continue the work, because they want to know that the funding is not, that you're not just going to implement a project and then it's just going to go away. And so the youth are going to get the benefit of the work that you're doing for a short period of time, and then all of a sudden that support goes away. So how can you keep it going? And again, collaboration is probably a really key piece to that sustainability as well.
Just to be clear, this is only 1 year, right? This funding?
Yes. We are not at this time 1 year.
Also, with a lot of people, when you apply to companies, they want a after action report, basically. So I don't know if y'all have that too, but I found that with a bunch of places that you have to give what you're doing with it, how it was used afterwards.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, as part of the ongoing grant process.
Do every month, you know,
Yeah, absolutely. And this grant in particular that the city is doing is going to be monthly reporting. So there's going to be expectations of reporting monthly on the outcomes. And again, that's going to, that will come out as once we've identified the organizations that will be awarded funds. We'll be working with the organizations directly on what the performance measures are, what the outcomes are, and you'll be required to report monthly on that. Yeah. Okay.
You all have performance measures developed, or you will develop those?
Yeah, they will be developed. Actually, our partners at CNU, they are going to be developing the performance measures, and they will be managing that piece as far as the performance measures, outcomes, reporting. They will be taking that piece for us.
Don't we want that info as we're applying though?
Well, so that information, the objectives, the goals and objectives and project priorities are all in the application instructions. Yeah. So the performance measures are going to be things like numbers, so like how many youth did you serve with this project, whatever your project is, whatever outcome it is because you're also in your grant application, you're going to say what your outcomes are. You're going to say, this is what I'm going to do with this project, and this is the outcomes I'm going to give in my project. So that's going to be a performance measure. That's what you're going to be reporting on. Whatever you tell us that you're going to be able to do, that's what we're going to ask you to report on. So there's going to be some things that will be grant specific, and this is with any grant. There's going to be some performance measures and outcomes that are grant specific that the grantor just wants to see across the board from all grantees. And then there are going to be those performance measures that you write into your application where you say, this is what I'm going to do. And then they're going to hold you to that and expect you to meet those outcomes as well. So there's kind of two pieces to that performance measures. But that will all come out with the awards. Yeah. Sure.
You indicated that we have to show our ability to maintain the program after 1 year. So my thought is, or my question is, how does the city play a role in this outside of, other than just providing the funds? So, for example, the program is to provide the funds, right? We're soliciting, you guys are soliciting for grantees so we can submit. But for what I'm getting is that it's just that 1 year. So here's an idea, here's what we want to do. You provide what it is that you're going to do, and you take it and run with it. So my thought is, how is the city going to support beyond a year? So I don't know if I'm trying, maybe it's for him.
Yeah,
I'm trying to get clarity beyond beyond, here's the 1 year.
Sure.
Go do what you need
Sure.
to do, and then what?
And
That's my
typically,
question.
and Alan can answer specifically for
Okay.
the city, but typically from a grantor perspective, the grantor is going to give you a finite amount of money for a finite period of time.
All right, I'm clear.
And so the expectation is that you'll implement that project. Then continuation of that project is not what the grantor is responsible for doing, it's
Correct.
what the organization is responsible for.
Right, and
Yeah.
and that's what I'm listening for, because this is the grant, this is the grant process. And I'm coming from a small business perspective.
Sure.
Where a lot of the small businesses, yes, I hear collaboration, and I know it's important, but there are a lot of small businesses that won't have those funds beyond a year.
Sure.
So where do we go? Where do we look? And if that's the cutoff, then it feels like we're good for 1 year and then we're not.
So I can tell you what I've done in the past. So, because again, part of my job is writing and managing grants, right, for the programs in our department. So we have grants, the grants end. What are we going to do? We write another grant. So if we want to continue that project, if we want to be able to continue to support that work that we're doing, before that grant ends, we research additional solicitations and we write a grant to continue that project. So you might be writing a grant now to start a new project now. But before that year ends, you want to identify another grant opportunity that will allow you to continue or enhance or expand that project that you're doing. So you're unfortunately it's just like grants for education. They give you a grant for a year. Then how are you going to pay for your second year? Right. So you have to identify additional funds. So part of that is just continuing that process and identifying funds that can continue the projects that you're implementing.
And I'm clear on that. So thank you so much for sharing that, because that's normally the process.
Absolutely.
And from my perspective, it's from someone, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're here to get those who are not really familiar with the process, right? To get them in line so that they too can apply because of for various reasons they haven't. But we wanna make sure that we provide it for everyone, and so I'm coming from the perspective as if I'm totally clueless. Right, and so that's where my questions are coming from, because I know there are people in the room that are totally clueless, and they may not know what's next, so when we
Sure.
say sustainability, right, Alan, you see what I'm saying? When we say sustainability,
Sure.
for me, I think it'd be beneficial to them to take them beyond that. year.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Right,
you're
like
right.
help them to see, because I'm a believer that if I can't visualize it, then it's
Sure.
not going to fall in,
Yeah, and
That's
that's
my
part
thought.
of that kind of brainstorming when you're writing your application and you're developing your project and you're going through all these different pieces of the application and you get to that sustainability piece. That's part of that brainstorming for sustainability. How am I going to continue this project? And you're going to be thinking about those things, and that's what you're going to put in your sustainability plan. This is how I think I will be able to continue this project. And sometimes you're requesting funding for a project that you know is only going to be a one-time thing. And then you don't necessarily have to worry about sustainability. If it's a one and done, then that's fine. Sustainability is not, but if it's if it's something you want to continue on an ongoing basis, that's when you kind of need to do that brainstorming on where can I get additional funds after this year ends, and be able to continue the work.
And so not to confuse anyone, but I'm going to try to add to what Tracy shared. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is create a more intentional project that we can repeat. I'm not going to say on an ongoing basis. I don't know how long ongoing is going to last, but you all know that we've been working very closely with Christopher Newport University, and that's for a very specific reason. They are there to not only help us with the measures and the goals, right, but we're trying to gain some traction with this work. And our council and other people in the community want to see the results of this work. And so that research piece and that data analytics piece is going to fall on the shoulders of Christopher Newport University. They're going to work hard for us and for you, so that at the end of the year, when you want to present that report to other parties that might be interested in your organization, when you want to reflect back on what did I accomplish, it's all going to be documented in a very organized report that tells the community this journey and what outcomes we were able to achieve in year one. And I have a pretty good feeling that that's going to be a good story. And if it's a good story, we want to continue to invest in it.
Right.
So it won't just be a 1 year exercise. We're done and ready to move on. So that's kind of our vision, and
Okay.
that's our strategy going into this.
Well, that's good, thank
Yeah.
you, because it felt like, just for me, and I'm speaking for me, all right, that it's 1 year and then that's it.
Right.
And so, the effort that's going into it,
Right.
right? It's a lot of effort that goes into it for it to be, and I know a lot of it, as far as the collaboration, you
Right.
still have to.
Sure.
But the city is saying, hey, come play with us. We want you to play with us. And we're like, yay, yes, we do. We want to play with you too. But then after 1 year, you're like, okay, playground closed. We don't want y'all to play anymore.
Yeah.
Then that's the perspective that I'm coming from. Is this an ongoing thing that's within the city that, yes, we have issues with gun violence, but it's not just going to stop there. Not for real, even though we see it on paper, but not for real though. We really want to see something that makes the difference.
Yeah, I don't think that we believe we will be able to make a hard enough impact on this problem
Absolutely.
in 1 year, right?
Absolutely.
But what we want to demonstrate is the comprehensive nature of the community coming together in order to move the needle.
Yeah.
And if we see that, then I'm pretty sure there will be a lot of interest in wanting to further the effort. So, and I'm sorry, ma'am in the red, you had a question earlier?
I do have a question.
Yes.
So you talk about sustainability, and when they ask about how do you plan on sustaining the project after, is it okay, or does that saying, oh, we're gonna apply for another grant, does that suffice?
I mean, I would-
Write that,
I would
or
give
do
maybe
you
a
have
little
to-
more detail than that. I mean, I would say, that you're going to research additional funding opportunities, to support XYZ. But yeah, I mean, you may not know when you're, especially if you're just starting, you know, and this is maybe the first grant you've written or the second grant you've written, you may not have a clear idea of in a year from now how I mean, you could get a foundation to support your work within that year. I mean, who knows what could happen within that year. So just what is if your intention is probably the most likely thing you would do would be that you would, research and find other grants that would support this work, then yeah, I would include that in your sustainability plan, definitely.
Make sure that we knock us out.
No, absolutely not.
And I think I'm gonna come to the corner and then back to the third row. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask, because I am one of the newbies that she talked about. Okay, just hypothetically, I write this grant and I get it, or not get it, I'm not really sure how it works.
You will get it.
And then, that's right, be right. Okay, and then next year comes and I'm ready to write another grant. Do they give you some type of because she said something earlier about how, you piggyback off of what you had written for the next grant? That's what I heard you say. So are they gonna give me like a template or something like that? Or do I have to just go on the data that I put in the computer, or how does it work?
So when you've written a grant, you've got the grant, and you're implementing your project, and you're looking for additional funding to continue that project. So when you research the grant opportunities, it's gonna be a grant solicitation or a grant announcement, and it's typically called a NOFA, which is a Notice of Funding Availability, or an RFA, which is a Request for Applications. And the grantor will put that out into the community and say, we're accepting applications for this grant. And that's where you're gonna get all the instructions from. And so you're gonna follow all those instructions. Now, I definitely would also encourage you not to wait till the end of the year. I mean, continue. Yeah. Yeah, so you're just gonna continue to find new grant announcements and respond to those grant announcements. Now, the instructions may be different for each one. It may not always be exactly the same.
You add some and you take some away.
Yeah, so you wanna just kind of design it to fit whatever, the instructions are for that grant. But if you're already implementing that project, then you definitely wanna use the outcomes that you've already shown, as part of that application, definitely.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sure. Somebody else have a
Tracy,
question?
one yeah.
I have two questions. So for the sustainability piece, is it okay if we take the corporate sponsorship approach? Go to corporations and ask, will you be willing to sponsor this program? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Whatever funding that you can find to support your project. I mean, you never know. There's so many things out there.
Well, and it's hard to ask somebody to sponsor something that's not real, but if
Sure,
you have
yeah.
the grant to make it happen and
Absolutely.
say, you sponsor this for next
Absolutely.
year.
Yeah.
Okay, and then, do we have an update on that Newport News community assessment data, that report coming out?
Yeah, so last week, Dr. Keener announced that it would be approximately 2 weeks before it was ready, so a little bit more time, but we're getting closer.
So next week, I guess,
All
probably.
right, and then is Donald gonna be sending that out to all of us via email?
Definitely.
Perfect,
Yes.
that's the right question.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'm sorry, I have one more. When you
Sure.
say sustainability, is it all financial or is it more when
No,
you say
so-
sustainability,
So how can you continue the project? It may not be finances, it may be human capital. So are you recruiting volunteers, or are
well,
you
that's what I
recruiting
was going to
people?
say. When you
Yeah.
say sustainability, I hear growth,
Sure, yeah,
right? Are we on the same sheet of music? So
Yeah.
it's not only growth financially,
absolutely.
it's growth in all of the aspects of that
Absolutely.
project.
Right.
How are you going to make that project grow?
Absolutely. So
Right.
especially if you say in this first year, I'm going to service, 50 youth. And then maybe, you through your sustainability plan, you're going to be able to double that,
Okay.
and serve 100 youth the next year. But you have to kind of explain how you're going to do it. So, are you going to apply for additional grants? Are you going to look for corporate sponsorships? Are you going to be hiring additional staff, or pulling in new volunteers? Because you can't, double the number of kids you serve if you don't have enough people, right? So all of that, not just your fiscal resources, but your human capital as well.
Right.
Are you looking at maybe if you don't have a physical location, are you gonna, in that year, find a physical location? Expand your business as a whole. So there's all kinds of different things that could be considered sustainability. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, now I'm going to pass it to Miranda.
All great questions. That's why we're here.
Good evening, everyone. As Tracy said, my name is Miranda, and I am going to talk about, we've already read the application, we've taken some time to prepare. What are a couple tips that we can offer to help you write your application? Because certainly writing your application is going to be one of the most important parts, because that's what we're going to judge your application on. So Tracy said in a lot of things I'm really just going to be re-emphasizing, because it looks like we have some of the same notes. And we can't stress enough to make sure you take the time to read the announcement. Read it, reread it, read it again, and make sure that you understand what it is that you are applying for. And so as you're reading the announcement, one tip that I would encourage you is maybe to go through it and take time to write an outline. Outline exactly what it is that you want to say. Outline what part of the application that you want to put it in. So when you're going in and you're completing the application, you already have a draft that you can refer back to, so you're not getting lost in the process. Because particularly if this is your first time writing the application, even though we believe we simplified the process, you can still get overwhelmed if it's your first time. So as you're reading the announcement, if you take the time to create an outline, couple bullet points under your outline, and then when you go to write the grant, when you go to apply, you'll actually have something to refer back to. Another thing that I would suggest is make sure that you choose a title that reflects what you're going to address. Don't tell us you're doing a dog shelter and then you tell us about cats. It doesn't make sense, right? So whatever your title is, make sure your title reflects whatever it is that your program is going to be about, because that's how we're going to identify what your project is. So again, make sure whatever your title is, it matches whatever it is that you're proposing to do. When you're writing your application, and this one, because we're in the age of technology, everything's on computer, make sure you use spell check. Make sure you use grammar check. Make sure you're writing in complete sentences. Make sure it makes sense, because there's going to be people who are reviewing your application, and we need to make sure that we understand what you're saying. So make sure your writing makes sense. Proofread your application. Proofread your application. If you see the little red line come under spell check, something is wrong. So, make sure you go back and you check that out, and make sure that you are clear and concise in what you're writing. Make sure you're clear and concise in what you're writing. Whatever the question is, answer the question. Answer the question as directly as possible. You don't have to give a whole book if a book isn't required. So make sure that you are clear and concise in what you're writing. In our world, most of us use acronyms. Don't put any acronyms in your application without explaining what they are. You may assume whatever your acronym is may be a common acronym, but if I never heard of it, I'm going to be lost. So make sure at least the first time that you use an acronym, introduce what that acronym is, so then as the reviewer is reviewing it, if we see it again, we know what it means. Don't assume that we understand the slang, the jargon. Not everybody is hip, So we're talking about serving young people, so you may want to try to put some language in your application that caters to young people. Don't do it. Don't do it, because we may not understand it, So save that jargon for them when you're servicing them. But when you're writing your application, make sure the reviewers know what they're saying. It's better to assume that we don't know than it is to assume that we do know and then we get lost in it. Make sure you fully describe what you are proposing. It's in your head what you're doing, but we don't know what's in your head. So make sure you fully describe what you are proposing, and then make sure it makes sense. Tracy talked about having a team that's helping you in your application and having somebody to review your application. If they ask questions, go back and answer those questions, because if they have questions, 9 times out of 10, the reviewers are probably going to have those same questions. So make sure you go back as you're building your team and they're giving you this critical feedback. Don't just dismiss what they're saying, because you invited them to be a part of your team for a reason. But when they're giving you this feedback, make sure you go back and actually put that in your application. And I said it before, answer was asked. If there's something in the application that doesn't apply to you, put NA. Because if we see a blank, we may just assume that you just didn't answer that question when it actually just didn't apply to you. So if it applies, make sure you fully answer the question so we'll understand. If it doesn't apply, make sure you indicate that it doesn't apply so you're not penalized for not answering a question. Make sure you manage your time. Again, writing a grant, for some, it may be as easy as baking a cake. For some, it may be as hard as building the Empire State Building. You know what your capabilities are. We know the deadline for this application is June 24th. That's about 3 weeks from now. Bullet your time. Create your outline. Create a schedule of how you want to get things done. Make sure you build in time to pass it on to someone else and ask them to review it. Make sure you build in time to get it back, to make whatever corrections they have. Create your schedule. Don't try to sit down and write everything at one time. And if you do, choose to sit down and write everything at one time. Take a day or two and then go back and reread what you wrote. Because it may have made sense when you were writing it, but then when you go back and reread it, you might be like, what was that? And if you're saying, what was that? We're going to say, what is that? So just make sure, that you build in the time. Again, we know the deadline is the 24th. Don't wait till the 24th to get it done. Don't wait till the 23rd to get it done. We never know what kind of technology issues you may have. God forbid your system may crash. You never know. So just make sure you build in an appropriate amount of time to get this application done. Take breaks and breathe. Don't allow yourself to get overwhelmed in the process, because if you manage your time and you build out the schedule, you built in this time for breaks. You built in this time for breathers. You built in time to write a little bit, go watch your favorite show, and come back to it later. So just make sure you're taking care of yourself as you're writing your application. And most importantly, ask for help. Not only, you talked about the team that's here. We're willing to walk with you as much as we can. You all have contact information for David, and we know that he's been pretty good at following up with you all and sending out information. If there's something that you don't understand, ask for help. When you're building out your team, ask for help. Not all of us know everything, but there's a little bit of us that know a little bit of everything, and we all come together. So as you're writing your application, just make sure that you ask for help. And that's really all I have. As you're writing your application, I just can't stress enough to make sure you read it, make sure you answer the question, make sure it makes sense, make sure you've given someone else time to review your application and getting some feedback for them. And then, of course, make sure you meet the deadline and submit it on time. Any questions for me about writing your application? You guys are experts at this.
No, you're an expert. Explain it.
I want to thank you for introducing a new bumper sticker. Break and breathe. Break and breathe.
All right, so if there are no questions about writing your application, I am going to turn it over to Suniti and Constantinos, who are going to talk to us about the money. All right, good evening, y'all. Good evening. Let's talk money. Y'all ready to talk money? All right, so one of the biggest parts of your application will be completing the budget. Okay, every grant that you apply for, as Tracy mentioned, some grants are small, some are larger, but one thing that will be consistent in every grant that you apply for is you will have to complete a budget. Now, what will be interesting for every grantor is how extensive the budget is and whether they provide you with a template or like an Excel spreadsheet to help you get it done, or if you'll have to create it yourself. Now, in this instance, for this grant that the city is offering, we are providing you with an Excel spreadsheet. But how many of you know that can still feel a little intimidating if you've never worked in Excel? I've worked in Excel and I still get intimidated working in Excel. So part of what we want to do tonight in talking about the budget, Constantinos is going to join me shortly to actually show you what the budget template looks like. And when you plug numbers in, it's going to auto-populate and calculate things for you, which makes it a bit easier. And I believe in front of you, you have an example of a sample budget we put together so you can see what it looks like practically. And he's going to kind of walk through that a little bit. Will that be helpful for you all? All right, so let's do a little overall chat about a budget. So why in the world do we need a budget as part of a grant? Why do we need to have that? Y'all, we're going to talk together. See where you're spending your money. Why else is it important to have a budget? Forecasting. What else is good?
Keep up with my money.
To keep up with your money.
Expenses.
Right? So a budget not only, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Know how many people you can help.
Know how many people you can help. So that's what I was going to say, is that a budget is not just good for the grantor who's giving you money, but it's helpful for you as an organization to help keep you on track. And as you're thinking about your project proposals, think in terms of costs. What is it going to take to actually get this project up and going? Because one thing that I doubt that this room lacks is passion for this work. You wouldn't be here if you didn't have the passion for the work, but you also need the money to do the work. So you have to be able to think about your budget in that way. So a couple of things to think about as you're formulating your budget. Make sure that you are realistic. Don't overstate or understate how much it's going to cost, right? So a budget is not an opportunity to splurge because somebody else is paying for it. It's an opportunity to think very practically about how much is it going to cost me for supplies to run this project? Do I need to hire new staff to support this work? So think in terms of what you will actually need to get the project executed. The other thing that you want to do with your budget is you want to make sure that you're thorough. Be very clear in, this is the dollar amount that I feel like I'm going to need. Now, a great example of what we have happening right now is with supply chains, right? Something that cost one price a year ago now costs something different in 2022. So understand, as you're building your budget, you're forecasting, that was a word that was used, you're forecasting what the costs are going to be, knowing that it could adjust up or down depending upon influences that you don't have control over. So that's another reason why you want to think about your budget very practically in terms of cost. You also want to make sure, again, that you don't make up figures. There's a lot of things that you can use what I call the book of Googleations. And I believe in the book of Googleations, and the book of Googleations can teach you things that you don't know about, right? And that even includes cost. So for example, if you say you're going to need supplies, maybe your supplies are ink pens you're going to need, legal pads you're going to need, go to OfficeDepot.com, go to Staples.com, go to Amazon, pull the numbers from there for the products that you're going to need. I know that sounds very simple and practical, but that's how you kind of need to think when you're building your budget. Don't try and figure it all out yourself. Go online and look up what your costs are going to be. Another example, let's say you're building travel into your budget, which is an allowable expense for this grant that's being provided. Here's a tip that I use, gsa.gov. You maybe want to write that, jot that down. gsa.gov. Here's what gsa.gov will do. If, let's say, you're building mileage into your budget. So there is a government rate for reimbursement for mileage that you can use as a basis for your figure. Let's say that your travel is going to require lodging, right? Every city that you travel to in the United States, GSA.gov can give you projections for lodging for that locality. It can give you per diem, which is like how much you'll spend daily on meals. The information is out there, is my point, right? Don't feel fearful that you have to figure it all out by yourself because the information is out there. Do research on salaries. If you're going to build in personnel, do a research on how much are people getting paid in this region for that position and even across the nation, and then do a comparison between the two, and maybe you choose the average between the two as your price point for the salary that you're going to build into your budget. Is that helpful? Okay, perfect. All right, so make sure that with your budget, you're following whatever the grantor's instructions are. So in this instance, along with your budget, you have to build in a budget narrative. What that simply means is that for every line item that you put into your budget, you put an explanation as to how and why you're going to use that money. Because again, the grantor, I think, as Miranda pointed out to us, can't get inside of our heads to figure out what we're trying to say and what we need money for. So when you put a line item in, just tell us, what are you using this for? And make sure that it connects back to your project. So it's the same principle that if you're building a project around dogs, but in your description, you're talking about cats. And then when you get to your budget narrative, you're talking about parrots. So where are we at? Are we doing dogs? Are we doing cats? Are we doing parrots, right? So it's just that practical in terms of thinking about even building out your budget. Couple of other things to know. Tracy talked about formatting issues. Some budgets you'll do for some grants, they'll ask you to format it in a certain way. You have to put it in a table. You got to use Times New Roman font. You have to use a 12-point font. Good thing about this grant that the city is offering, you don't have to do that. It's all in the Excel spreadsheet and already built in for you. But make sure that you're reading those instructions and following them accordingly. What you're gonna find when Constantino shows you the Excel spreadsheet is that there's actually a sheet on that spreadsheet that says read me. At the bottom, it'll say read me, and it gives you guidelines and instructions to help you in filling out your budget, okay? Couple of other things, again, allowable expenses. If you missed the session that we did last week, David, I believe you have already sent out instructions, or I know they can definitely download it online, but how, yes, instructions for the grant. Yes. Already been sent out. So if you don't have the instructions for the grant, you can always go to the online grant portal, and I believe it's in the upper right-hand corner. There's a link that says instructions, and you can download that, and it will tell you what expenses you are allowed to put into your budget for this grant cycle. Let me see. Let me get a little closer. Yes. Fantastic. You put it on the back, Constantinos?
So that's the review tab.
That's the read me tab. The read me tab I was talking about. If you flip over the budget.
Also,
Okay.
what's allowable, not allowable for the grant. There's more, the instructions are much more, that's just very specific to what's allowable for the budget.
Constantinos is on it. That's why we're a team, y'all. That's why we're a team. Yes, asking for help, collaboration. So that shows you your allowable expenses, what you can actually put into your grant. So any questions about that? Any questions so far? Yes, sir.
Question, and I
Yeah.
apologize if I said earlier, so you're talking about potential travel costs, and I know this grant is for the city of Newport News. But is there the potential where we're building into this grant if you have to go to a detained facility when they come back? Is that what you're talking about, the travel costs to that's what I'm a little confused, because if we're servicing Newport News, I want to make sure that in the project outline that's captured. Because I know some folks are coming back here, and those are the ones that we want to address to hopefully do the prevention piece. So
I'll hold off before I respond, because you look like you want to say something to start you.
I can.
You look like you were getting up, Alan. I'm going to defer to you first, and then I'll piggyback on what you say.
So my response is absolutely. You want to think about all of the costs that would be required to fund your program. So in that example, if you're building in a cost factor to transport students or for adults to visit a certain facility, then how many trips is that approximately a week? How many trips a month times whatever the GSA reimbursable mileage figure is. And then that's what you would put into the line item.
Yes. So that is a great response relative to if you're building it into your project or program in that fashion. Travel can also be attributed to, let's say a part of your travel is you're doing training somewhere. You need to get a certification to be able to execute your project or your work, and it requires you to travel somewhere else. You can build in travel in that way. Travel might include your airline costs. It might include your driving, your lodging, your per diem, your meals.
And the only reason why I was asking, thank you, Dr. Moody,
Sure.
for that. And Alan, the only reason is because I'm just looking under the unallowable cost. And it just says here, vehicles normally or routinely provided, which is unallowable. So if we're going to, bring someone back, just wanna make sure that we're square when we're writing this of the potential cost. That's just for clarity.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, and Constantinos, if you want to weigh in on this, when it talks about vehicle, I think we're talking about in terms of purchasing a vehicle. So no, we're not funding any Lamborghinis or any, things like that for this grant. Yes.
Rolls Royce.
Okay.
Good questions, though. Other questions? Okay. All right, so those are things to think about in terms of building out your budget. And again, some things are repetitive to what Miranda talked about is in your budget. Of course, you want to be clear and be concise, and you want to use language that is simple and easy to understand in your budget narrative. Never assume that the person who's reading and reviewing your grant knows what you're talking about and what your passion is. Write it in a way that we have never heard it before because we haven't heard it before. So think about it in terms of that. Would you say use English? So yes, just making sure you do that. So before I turn it over to Constantinos, yes, ma'am. No worries.
I think that a case could be made, but just checking, so if we're trying to build sustainability, is that like building infrastructure and capacity within organizations to continue the work and do the work? How do you feel about that? As allowable expenses?
Yeah, I think your question is right on target. Maybe for some of us, the details of that infrastructure would be important.
Sure.
Right.
But yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
Well, when you think about hiring new staff and things like that, and then the grant ends in a year, like there may be some other things we could do to ensure that, and could that be funded?
I think you just have to make a linkage to the project. It has to be a clear linkage. It cannot have the appearance that you're just trying to bring on personnel that you're ultimately going to use for some other things that you're doing in your organization. And it's not to say they may not have multiple tasks that require them to work on multiple projects, but your linkage between why you're writing in that staffing for that project has to be very clear. What will they add to the project that you are proposing? So thinking about it in that way. So just make sure you think in terms of clarity, so there's no gray area about how you're going to use it to support ongoing infrastructure. You're welcome.
Equipment would be another way of, if it were a certain device that would increase efficiency, or if you could use a certain case management tool to talk to other people. I mean, all those things would be examples of infrastructure that would help you sustain the program and increase efficiency and outcomes.
And it may help you with scalability as well. So on the handout that you have with the definitions, it talks about scalability. And what scalability really is how can the project, how will you grow it beyond this period here? How can it continue to grow and expand, whether it's to meet the needs of a greater number in your target population? How can you scale? And so to your question, you may think about that in terms of writing in your budget. How can you write in something that will support scaling the program, whether it's over the next 12 months, over the next 3 years, or what have you? Think about that. And I think I would want to reiterate with sustainability that as you're writing your project descriptions, think about how you're going to sustain it as you're writing, if that makes sense. So writing a project that's just going to work for a short amount of time, stretch yourself to think, how can I actually grow this? How could this evolve and have more impact over the course of X amount of years? And again, thinking back to the word forecasting, as an organization, you always want to be thinking at an organization level, you want to be thinking about how you can grow and expand your organization. So that's just a little tidbit to think about scaling. Scaling is not just from a project standpoint, but your organization. How are you constantly thinking about moving your organization forward and having a greater impact? Okay? So I hope that's helpful. Constantinos, you ready for the demo?
Let's do it.
All right.
So as we mentioned, this current grant is through our online portal. So as you're going through the application, you will get to the part related to the budget and the budget narrative, and it will allow you to open the Excel file at that time. And that's what this file will be, what populates this example that we have in here. So what I've done here is just create a sample based on a application related to a boxing training session, where we just kind of wanted to fill out what it would look like. As mentioned earlier, you want to assess all your funding sources when you're doing a grant. So we do have a couple columns here to be able to drop in buckets of what kind of sources are going to be funding this program. It could be federal grants, it could be state, it could be us, it could be fundraising, it could be corporate, it could be a number of things here. So you want to be able to just populate, hey, this is what we already have in this grant if you are going to have more than one source supported in the program that you're requesting. It's not a requirement. It can be standalone, funded by the city, but we understand that there will be grants. There will be proposals out there that may have more than one source. So we just want to give you an opportunity to put it all in and show the total cost of the program and the impact overall. So as we kind of go through here, we do have it broken up between personnel, equipment, And then supplies and other expenditures. We did keep it very basic. We didn't want to make it overly complicated. Again, I'm just going to kind of add on to what we had right here. So with our staff, we had 3 employees, and we said that the average salary was $15,000 per employee. And based on what's kind of missing in the background is that we would know that, hey, this program is tied to, we're going to hire part-time trainers to be able to provide a service and to train the youth in our area. And in this example, we had having $30,000 funded from federal, $5,000 from other, and $10,000 from us. They're asking for $10,000 to support it. And then over here, it's very important in our budget narrative, column I, that we describe why we have this expense. This is a very basic one, not a great one, but it gives you a general idea that we want to be able to articulate why we need to hire these trainers, how often, how many hours per week they will be needed. Of course, there will be payroll taxes related as we go through it. The spreadsheet updates throughout the same way, so I'm going to kind of update as we kind of go further down here. We have, in this example, punching bags, speed bags. We are updating the quantity that we have. So in this case, I said we needed 2. Let's say I needed 5. I was wrong. The price, cost. We mentioned earlier, how do you find that cost? I have no idea about boxing. I went to Google. I went to the first site that popped up, and I got a better idea what the fair market cost is for these kind of this materials will cost. And I was surprised to see there's a range. $159 was kind of right in the middle. Some are $79, $500. So when you're looking at it, you want to be practical about it and find out what you really need, because not all of them are created equal. Make sure you're getting what you're asking for. And then as we kind of went through it, in this example, I have requested full funding for these punching bags to be purchased using the mini grant. And then, of course, I completed the budget narrative. Just kind of scroll down here real quick. I'm going to add to this part right here to supplies and other expenses, since it's a little easier, a little bit more broader range. We were talking earlier about, and it seems to be very important with the heat currently, we're going to need water. So I'm just going to add on to it. Hey, when I'm building out my budget, I'm going to buy cases of water. So maybe I'll put on here case of water, or bottled water, 12 bottles per case. So again, we're filling it up. We'll say I need 12 bottles per case. Maybe I'm going to need 20 cases for this program. That's not reasonable. This is a long time. Let's do 100. We're thirsty. Okay. So and then you have a price per cost. This is going to be reasonable. Let's not put $99. We know, well, it may be, but maybe the cost of 12, maybe we'll get into good stuff. It's $3.99. So when we're looking at this, we'll figure out, hey, we have 100 bottles, $3.99. We want to be able to, sorry about that, say how we're going to fund this. If this is going to be strictly through the mini grant, okay, we would just scroll over here to the right and go to the cell in the row related to Youth Intervention Mini Grant, and we would just type in the full amount. You can do it a few different ways. Of course, since it's being funded strictly through here, we can just do a simple calculation, and it should tie back. $399 for bottled water. This is how much you anticipate it cost them to buy 100 cases of bottled water. And of course, we would add, we need to stay hydrated. Right? These cells will expand as you go. So the more you write, it will automatically expand. So you don't have to worry about it not showing up when it prints and when you submit it. It'll automatically expand for you. There's no character limit. You can add as much as you would like. Get rid of all these extra D's. As mentioned earlier, it will populate as you go down to show us the total cost of the project. In this example, we're proposing a program that is being funded through multiple sources, $30,200 from the federal government, $5,200 from other, and then $13,677.94. We don't have to go to the penny here, for a total cost of a little over $49,000. That would be a grant. You want to ensure that that total ties back to what you're anticipating this project is going to cost. We want to make sure it's detailed, you're not missing anything. We mentioned talking to people who are budget people who would say, hey, you may need additional workers' comp insurance, whatever it may be. You want to be able to include all of that you will need to make this program successful. And you'll just be able to add as you go. It'll automatically populate for you.
I'm clear.
Or the cost changes. Now it's $5.99. But again, when we're looking at this, we want to be reasonable. We all understand that costs are going up. Okay, so it is a little different. We also understand that even when you come up with an estimate during the proposal, when it actually comes time to purchase it, it may not line up. So, everybody understands that the market right now is volatile about it. I mean, it is what it is. It's just up and down. So, it's just an estimate. Yes, ma'am.
Question about the level of detail. I know I would have a worksheet for myself to back up kind of what I put on here. But for example, under the salary, so is that for 10 weeks of work, they're getting $15,000, or is it a school year long, or?
Sure, and it will be dependent on the program, right?
Should we put what our intent is to give you that detail?
Yes.
Right, so, like I said, this is a description, probably not a great one, probably is not gonna get any money, sorry, it's just, but we would say, training is anticipated, I have a typo, see, a little red line's gonna pop up.
Is this the only place where budget narrative goes, or is there another place in that?
This is the only place on the spreadsheet. Yeah, so we hopefully simplify the process, because some grants that you do, you have to do the budget, and then there's a separate section for the narrative, you gotta tie that together, but we put it all into one spreadsheet in this instance. And I think what's critical for the budget narrative is detail, and I think that's kind of what you were getting at, Maureen, is make sure, again, think in terms of the fact that the people reading it, we don't know what you mean. We don't know that it's 52 weeks, 10 weeks, 10 days, or whatever, so make sure you put that level of detail into your narrative. Don't make any assumptions, even if your program is a well-known program or your organization is well-known, don't assume that those who are reviewing know anything about your organization. Did I see a hand? Somebody was gonna say something.
I was gonna
Yes.
say, it makes you do what's required, and that is provide a narrative for every line item. So if you look at the budget and you have numbers in a line, and that budget narrative is empty, then you're not meeting the requirements because it's asking for a narrative. So you made it simple and easy for us not to fail in this, or miss it in this area. So you look at the budget, you just say, okay, I need to say something in every line, except where the titles are, and it says budget narrative there, so it's already filled in.
Yes.
And I understand from what you're saying, you're gonna have like a sub-ledger behind it that lists employee A, B, C, and D, this is how much the costs are, and you're gonna have a much more detailed breakout on your end, because we won't know who that is at that point, but we will look at, we're trying to get a better idea of just how many staff it's gonna take, the average cost it's gonna take to employ them, and go from there. You're gonna have a much more detail based on the actual, that's an average, right? You're gonna say this person gets $20 an hour, this one's 25, whatever it may be, that'll be in your backup data.
And relative to staff and personnel, I think that becomes even more critical, because let's say you're asking, like in this example, even though it's not broken out, let's say you're asking for 3 additional positions. Each of those positions might have a different role. Like one person may be a manager, one may be a coordinator, one may be an outreach worker. So you want to make sure that you itemize each and you can explain what their role is tied back to the project, so we get the full picture. Again, if you remember nothing else, don't assume that we know what you're talking about. You're telling us a story. in the grant. You're painting a picture for us of what it is that you want to do. Yes.
A quick question, so, and I apologize if you guys, if it's in here, I didn't read the whole solicitation here, but the ceiling for the grant, or this is just gonna be shown on when you submit it, as far as the ceiling amount?
Do you mean, is there a cap?
Yes.
No, you
Okay,
put
okay.
in what you
Gotcha.
say you need for
Gotcha.
your project to execute it and be successful.
Got you.
But just be mindful that this does have a start date and end date.
Right.
August 1 to June 30th. So putting in a budget or a request for a program to run 3 years won't work, right? So you have to just make sure that is for that time period. But there is no cap on that request for that period.
So let's kind of bring this on back we picked you all up at a bus stop and we're gonna come on back to the destination now. So I'm hopeful this has been helpful for you all thus far, especially if you're a newer organization in the room. It can feel very intimidating to go into a grant process if you've never done this before or you've done it a limited amount of times. And it's our hope that tonight's session has been helpful for that. So I'm not the wrap-up person, but let's talk about what happens before you hit the submit button. Okay, so we've gone through what to do, pre-application, you're organizing, you're writing your application, you're doing the budget. Now, you're about to hit the submit button. Now, you all talk to me and tell me a couple of things that you think would be important to do before you hit the submit button. Proofread, read it. Read it again, put it into someone else's hands to look over it before you hit the submit button. What else do you think would be helpful?
Did you answer all the questions of the solicitation?
Did you answer all of the questions on the solicitation? So this may sound very repetitive. You've heard it from the time that Tracy stood here behind the mic. Read the instructions. You read them again so that you're making sure that you're following all the guidelines before you hit submit. What else do we want to do?
Online application, maybe doing it on a Word document first.
Yes.
Do all your bullet points, fill it out, and then copy it and paste it into the application in case something go wrong. Don't type everything.
You took my notes. You want to come up here with me? It's just like a little section. But no, thank you. That's very good. That is an excellent recommendation that before you plug it into the portal, just open up a Word document and go through. And then that gives you an opportunity. Miranda told you to watch for the red squiggly lines. When you run your spelling and your grammar check, it'll pick up on those things and then you can just cut and paste it. And that also contributes to the draft that she talked about and also writing out an outline. So that's an excellent suggestion. Thank you. Don't use slang and jargon. An acronym. So if your program is called the ARC and it's A.R.C, don't assume we know what ARC means. Tell us what ARC means. And then if you use ARC throughout the rest of the application, we have a point of reference. What else should we do before we hit submit? Anything else?
Make sure it's before 5 p.m. on the 24th.
Say that one more again. A little bit louder.
Make sure that it is, when you hit submit, it is before 5 p.m. on the 24th of June.
Yes.
So it has to be 4:49, but you want it to be before that, but after 5 o'clock, it's late.
Yes. Yes, indeed. I recall when I was working on my doctorate, we always had a deadline. 11:59 p.m. Not Eastern Standard Time.
Get it right, exactly.
Eastern Standard Time. So it is important. I will tell you all from personal experience. So I've been doing grant writing since 1999. But I have had the experience of going back through, I had done all this work, all the writing and everything, and I hit the submit button and it rejected it because let's say it was due at 5 o'clock. And so I hit the submit button, and what happened at that time, the little thing was spinning in the middle of the screen. And y'all, I think that thing spent for at least 2 minutes it must have spent, right? So by the time it actually went through and submitted, it was 5:02. so my application didn't go through. So we don't stress that to try and scare you, but it's the reality that if an application says you have to have it in by a certain time, that's where that timeline Miranda talked about becomes very important. So you can pace yourself, but make sure that you get it in and get it across the line, because who wants to do all of that work? And then it's just done, okay? What else do we want to do before we submit?
Call David Duck.
That's not on my list. No. So you want to do all the things that you guys have talked about. So make it happen.
Pray over it before you say that.
That part too. That part too. And know that before you hit the submit button, applaud and celebrate yourself for doing it, because for some of you, you have talked yourself for so long out of moving forward with looking for funding because it felt so intimidating. Or you've gone through situations where you applied and you were declined. And so just that fear of rejection sometimes, but when you hit that submit button, can you just celebrate yourself that you accomplished it and you got it across the line? And then on the other side of the submission, once you hit that submit button, then you trust and you have confidence that you have put your best foot forward. You have done the very best job that you could possibly do, and you trust it to turn out as it should turn out for you in this instance. And even if the answer is no, no is not a forever no. It's a no to that funding stream. It's a learning. Everything's an opportunity, right? Yes, ma'am.
So if you apply, or when you apply, if you do get the no.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you all offer like an exit interview as to what we could have done as an organization to have gotten the yes?
Great question, and I'm going to invite David Duck up because actually, I don't want to steal his notes. I have his notes, but I don't want to steal his notes to answer that question. So he's going to answer that question. But yes, sir, you have a question in the back?
Yeah, will the city evaluate this program after a year's time to determine if they'll go forward with it for another year? Will they evaluate the whole program?
Yes. Come on, Mr. Archer.
Yes, the answer is yes. And that's the role of CNU as our data partner. And so they're going to work with us throughout the year on our metrics, on our outcomes. They're vested in ensuring that we're successful, and they want to do everything they can to support us. But we've nearly not partnered with a university like this in the past, so it's a welcome opportunity. And we really look forward to working with them and as I mentioned earlier, moving the needle on this issue. It's about demonstrating what we can do collectively as a community to impact this issue. So the answer is yes.
Which university are you partnering with?
At Christopher Newport University. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Is it all right if we partner with Christopher Newport University as part of our application?
So I would say in the first session when Dr. Keener shared information with everyone, he did say, he sent an open invitation to everyone in the room to say, if you have questions, if there's anything I can do to help you with your application, if you need data, is there anything from the survey that you want to use to back up your application, do not hesitate to call me. I don't know anything that would.
I think it would depend on what you're asking them to do.
Yeah.
I'm our academic director of the Center for Community Engagement at CNU.
Okay.
So that's why I'm here. I'm helping one of our community partners with this grant. And I have some students who want to collaborate with them on some of their programs. And some of that funding comes from the programs I oversee at CNU, but then, so any of the other sources listed on this grant application would probably be from the Center for Community Engagement. Is that okay?
So I think as long as there's not a conflict of interest between the Center for Justice Policy, that is doing the evaluation of because they're helping to do the data analysis and evaluation of these grants, you don't want to have a conflict of interest with that.
Sure.
So I would say as long as they're not involved in it, then it would probably be okay.
Okay.
All right, any other questions for right before you click that submit button?
David, can I just make a point of
Please,
clarity?
please.
On the point about if it doesn't apply, put NA. And a lot of grants, there may very well be questions that don't apply and you're gonna put NA. But with this particular grant, we do expect to see an answer for all the questions.
Wow.
So I just don't want anybody to put an NA on something, and then we say, but you didn't explain this, and then you say, well, you said I could put an A. So every question on this particular grant application for these mini grants needs an answer.
And that's why it's important to read it.
Yes.
You know you should answer it. So can I further clarify to that point, is that if there's a situation where you don't have an answer for, this is an opportunity to add an attachment or an addendum that explains, I'm saying addendum, attachment, because you can upload documents into the portal to attach to your application, put an explanation as to why, whatever the challenge is with whatever that thing is that you can't answer or that you feel you cannot
Because
answer.
each of the questions on this application are basic grant
Right.
pieces. So your needs assessment, your project design, your budget, your sustainability. So those are basic pieces of the grant application. So you should be able to provide an answer. When we are evaluating the applications, we're going to be looking for you to have explained all of those things. So yeah, if for some reason there's a challenge, I would say reach out to David.
Yes.
And there you got to give a clear explanation on why you didn't answer that question.
All right, so we're coming around the end of the mountain here and closing out. I just wanted to talk to you really briefly about what you need to be doing or thinking about after you've already hit that submit button. So once you've sent it off and it's been submitted and you can breathe a little bit and say, all right, that is done. What's next? What are some of the things that you should think about then? So I want you to firstly make sure that you maintain current contact information, meaning reach out to me if something changes with your contact information. We want to make sure that if we plan to fund your grant, that we have a way of contacting you. I don't have a stat for it, but I'm sure there's a substantial amount of grant funds, or probably trillions of dollars around this country, that go unclaimed or end up having to be reabsorbed because as soon as they award it to somebody, they send them that email to say, hey, you're awarded, and it bounces back to them because the email has changed. Or you go to call the number that they listed and you get that you've reached a number that has not set up their voicemail and they're not in service. So we have no way of contacting you. So we want to make sure that you have an opportunity and a direct line of communication with me to update any information if something changes between the time that you submit and the time that you hear back about the award, because we want to make sure we get you. After that, you want to make sure that you follow up with me if you have any additional questions about the timeline, but at the same time, please exercise some patience. The timeline is on the sheet behind there. I have a ton of patience, and I'm just asking you to give yourself a little bit of additional patience too, to make sure that you don't have to, follow the timeline. You don't have to call every day. What's going on? You don't have to email every day. It says on here in the notes, don't harass the grantor. I'll just take it a step back and say, just exercise some patience. I will definitely be patient and make sure that I'm in contact to let everybody know where we are in the process. I don't see any snafus happening with the timeline. We're going to be pretty strict to that and make sure that we adhere to that. But in the case that happens, you will know well ahead of time via email from me. Then, as Dr. Newby said, if you are selected and you get that call or that letter or that email or whatever, definitely have a party, celebrate your accomplishment, but also follow up with whatever required next steps are asked of you after you get that award. That'll be outlined in the award communication. So make sure that whatever it is that you need to do, if you need to confirm, if you need to accept, if you need to submit some further documentation, whatever it is that may come after that, please be responsive to those things so that we can see the process through to the end. And then lastly, again, if you're not selected, we want to make sure that you follow up. Contact us back to say, what is it that I could have done? What tips do you have to kind of help me better posture myself for my organization in the future, for future opportunities? What are some ways that I can enhance what I did to make sure that I'm successful in the future? All right, so those would be after you submit. I did see one question for that. You have a question?
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So you're not clear on the form of notification, where it says notification already, you rattled off.
A couple
email,
different ways, right.
Right, but so at this point, you're not clear on what,
I'm not. Is someone else clear?
okay. on what form it's gonna come in?
Yeah, so once they're awarded, how are they being notified? Via email,
Will it be
phone
an email or
calls?
call
Well, historically, we've done it via letter, by mail.
or a letter by mail? Okay, so we
Make
look
sure
for
that address
that.
is right, make sure that contact information is right.
Okay, so we just wait for a letter in the mail and not an email? Is that what you're saying? I
Right.
just wanna be clear on that.
We can send out a letter saying that the award letters went out, so you're on the lookout for it.
You can
But
send
the
an email
actual
out for
individual letter to you or whoever the organization may be will come via.
So in other words, what I hear you saying is that don't look for an email, look for a letter in the mail. That's what I hear you saying. Is that what you're saying? sir?
Correct.
Perfect.
Look for an email that says that, hey, if you got awarded, you're gonna get a letter, but then wait for the actual letter to come in.
Got it.
We don't want you not knowing where we're at in the process.
Right.
I think it's fair to say that we could definitely send a letter saying the process is being concluded, award letters will be going out. I'm not gonna give a date, but, and then you can be on the lookout for it, and then go from there.
Thank you. So I will be in contact via email throughout the entire process, through the award being distributed or, through that award decision. But the actual notification of whether you were selected or not will come via mail. Any other questions for me? All right, I think Mr. Archer is going to join me for some closing remarks, and then we'll talk about next steps and cut you loose for the evening.
Thank you, David. My comments will be brief. I did want to let everybody know, at our session last week, we talked about the importance of collaboration, and a number of people suggested that if we could do anything to connect people to each other. So for those that did want to reach out and find out, who's doing something similar to what I'm thinking about, people could have that conversation. So I hope tomorrow via David to send out a chat feature. So our IT department has developed a chat feature. What we will do is we will send everyone a link. Do not share that link with anyone that you don't particularly want to talk to, but only those individuals who receive the email with that link will be able to engage in the chat. So it'll be self-moderated among all of those individuals that have either attended one of these sessions or who have pre-registered with the city. So you can put in who you are, what you're interested in. Others can look at the chat, and if they want to chime in, if they want to partner, if they want to say, hey, let's get together and work on something, you guys can communicate that way. So hopefully that will come out tomorrow. I previewed the feature today. I think it's ready for prime time, and we're ready to share it with you guys. The other items that I wanted to reiterate, just in terms of providing some humor for the evening. Don't forget to break and breathe. Thank you, Miranda. And don't forget the book of Googleations. Thank you, Sanithia. And who is your project manager? David Duck. All right, David, take it away.
Speaking of David, so this is the last part here. Just wanted to give a couple next steps. As Alan said, we hopefully are going to be sending out information that includes that chat feature. Most of you hopefully received the email that I sent the other day, talking about how we can get the ball rolling on communications while we were working on that chat feature. I did hear from you all, talked on the phone with a couple of you that said, hey, we know you're working on something digital, but we need to know who's doing what now. So we were able to send out the information for all the folks that registered in the early communication while we solicited anybody else that wanted to be a part of that communication to reach out to me. And I did receive all your emails, and come tomorrow after 12 o'clock, once I put that date on there, I'll send out another spreadsheet that contains everybody else that reached out to me since I sent the email, in addition to hopefully the chat feature tomorrow. And that email is also going to come with a couple other gifts. It's going to come with 2 survey links for you all to give us feedback on how we did for last week's session and this week's session, to kind of let us know how we can alter these in the future and how we can better kind of prepare ourselves to be resources to you all through this process and through similar processes. And it will also include a link to the recording from last week's session, which is also available now too. So all of that is coming in one email tomorrow afternoon. Yes.
So the information that we send tomorrow before 12 o'clock
Yes.
is to DJ
at nnva.gov.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
And I will send out a completed spreadsheet that adds everybody else to the original one so that you all can start making those communications that way more directly. And then you all can jump into the chat feature and start collaborating away from that aspect too. So just trying to create as many multiple layers and opportunities for you all to collaborate if you choose to. I do want to make it clear again that collaboration is not mandatory. It's something that we are encouraging. But like I said in the email the other night, if you have everything you need within your organization, by all means, run, make it happen. But we encourage folks to work together just for that collective impact benefit. Any other questions before we let everybody go? We are a little bit past our time. All right, thank you all for joining us. Please drive home safely.